Yulia Nikolaeva, I Will Not Forgive You. Chapter 1. There were 3 of them, 2 men in their 30s and a girl in her 20s. They had come from far away. They entered the hotel lobby just as I was trying to explain myself to Sergei. That was the name of my hapless suitor, who had come from Saratov on a 3-day business trip and who had started a romance with me. The business trip was over. He eagerly tried to stay, and I tried to explain to him how foolish what he was planning to do was. In the end, we reached a climax, and he accused me of being a cheap slut. I took the insult philosophically, but the trio burst onto the scene. On the scene with surprise and interest. Whatever anyone says, many people like to watch other people's dirty laundry being aired. Glancing at the new arrivals, I said to Sergei, "If you're done, you can go. I have clients." He blushed with anger and, after uttering a few more kind words, walked away. Hopefully forever. The trio approached, looking at me. I responded with a friendly smile. The blond man, about 30 years old, tall and well-built, attracted attention. He casually approached the counter, showing everyone that he didn't give a damn and that he despised human beings. Wearing sunglasses, a straight, handsome nose, and a strong-willed mouth. In short, the dream of any silly girl. The girl and his girlfriend are immediately noticeable. She tries to look confident, but in reality she feels uncomfortable. She is pretty, dressed fashionably, with an unremarkable face. It's even surprising that this blonde is with her. The third guy is about 30 years old. He has nice thick dark hair, brown eyes framed by long, fluffy eyelashes, regular features. His figure is simpler than his companions, and he himself gives the impression of a sweet boy, but I liked him more. His soft gaze and smile were endearing. Interesting customs, remarked the blond man, resting his elbows on the edge of the bar. The girl stood next to him, and the brunette stood opposite me. Stretching my lips into a smile, I replied, "You can look for another place." "Aren't you afraid we'll really leave?" asked the brunette. "From the only hotel in town." I smiled again. There was nothing to say in response. At that point, I decided to stop arguing. They weren't to blame for what they had witnessed. "Are you going to rent a room?" I asked kindly. "Probably," said brunette, looking at me with interest. "How long do you want to stay?" "A couple of days for now," he replied, with the possibility of extending his stay. "Great." The smile stayed on my face like glue. "Your passports, please." They handed over their documents, and I began to arrange separate rooms for them. 1 single room and 1 double room. His name was Victor, the blond man was Andrei, and the girl was Svetlana. They were all from a regional city not far from Moscow, at least according to their registration. They paid for their stay, and I returned their passports, after which I showed them to their rooms. I opened the doors and gave them their keys. My assumption was confirmed. The blond man took 1 room with the girl. "You can check in. If you have any questions, call me," I said with a smile, and they disappeared into their rooms. The next day, Stepan came to see me. This was a truly rare event over the past year. Stepan was a forester and lived a secluded life in a small house in the forest. He had no relatives in the city, so he didn't come here often. To catch him, you had to go to a village near the forest and ask the locals to take you to his house. However, few people visited Stepan without important business, and no one had any important business. When I saw him in the hotel lobby, I whistled and straightened up, taking my feet off the table. What a guest! I sang as I stood up. Did you miss me? We hugged, and I led him into the room behind the counter, where there was a table with a teapot and a sofa. From the outside, our friendship with Stepan might have seemed strange, a bearded man in his 50s and a girl half his age. But a few years ago, fate brought us together, and we became attached to each other. Stepan knew the forest like no one else and showed me it. For almost 2 years, I lived studying the nature and habits of the forest until it accepted me. I understand that it sounds strange from the outside, but what else could a girl living in a small provincial town surrounded by impenetrable forests? Anyway, after 2 years, I returned to the city and have been working in its only hotel for about a year. The work isn't dusty because we don't get a lot of tourists, but I like it. Sometimes it gets boring, and I start a romance with some visitor. To be honest, the last one didn't end very well, so it's better to take a break from that activity for a while. But let's get back to Stepan. He happily drank his tea and then said, "Malushka, I'm here on business." Frowning, I stared at him expectantly. If Stepan had come on business, it meant that something out of the ordinary had happened. 3 people came to me yesterday, he began. 2 guys and a girl offered me a job as a guide in the forest. I immediately understood who he was talking about and asked, "Where do they want to go?" Stepan glanced at me from afar. I immediately understood where he was going with this. Our forest, though peaceful, is surrounded by swamps, and it's easy to get lost. And you? I refused. He shrugged. I'm too old to go there, and I don't need to. Stepan couldn't be tempted with money. They're of no use to him in the forest. Setting off on a long journey for the sake of adventure isn't his style either. I see, I nodded. So you've decided to tell me. He hesitated, then said, "They tried to persuade me. Anyway, I said I wouldn't go, but there's a man who knows those places. If he agrees." Stepan stared at me expectantly. Unlikely. I smiled radiantly, and he nodded. That's what I thought, Malushka. And who knows if there's anything there or if they've already found and taken everything. But I thought it was worth telling you. Maybe you'll find it interesting. Again, it's some kind of entertainment. Stepan stared at me expectantly. At me. I thought about it. The entertainment, as he called this activity, seemed very dubious to me. I didn't know for sure, but I was sure that searching there for treasure was useless. Not the same people went there before these guys so that something could be found after them. However, the event itself did not oblige me to do anything. In my opinion, no one goes to those places now, and I had a vacation coming up that I could spend in such a strange way. Especially since I would have spent it at home in front of my laptop, not showing my nose outside of Stepan's apartment. His proposal was, of course, motivated by a desire to save me from what he considered to be my inevitable death from boredom. Being a recluse himself, he inexplicably convinced me that I should, on the contrary, lead an active lifestyle. I was increasingly drawn to sociopathy, but I promised him that I would fight it and do everything I could. That's why I thought about his proposal. There are many guides in the city, but no one will go so far into the forest. Stva is right. He's the only one who knows those places. At least that's what the locals think. There's also me, but I was last there a year and a half ago. I voiced this thought. I'm not arguing, sweetheart. Stva replied. If you're going to refuse, then refuse. Although you're being disingenuous here. Even in 20 years, you'll still be able to walk through there and not get stuck in any swamps. I gave Stva a withering look, but couldn't help laughing, and he followed suit. When he stopped laughing, he said quietly, "It's hardly dangerous, sweetheart." The guys seemed simple, although I didn't like the blonde one, he was too cocky. I nodded thoughtfully. We sat in silence for a couple of minutes. Then Stepan got up and went to the exit. He stopped at the door and asked, "So what should we tell them?" "Tell them to wait for the conductor at the hotel at 5 p.m. Stepan nodded as if he didn't. Doubted my answer, and I was lost in my thoughts. I can't say that people like this are new to our city. During the war, many battles took place in the local forests, so now, in peacetime, these places are in demand among black market dealers and those who work with them. Guides are often sought after, especially in recent years. Before that, people used to travel to the city from the other side of the forest, but about 4 years ago, there was a hurricane, after which most of the roads were flooded with impassable mud. The guides were afraid to go there. Now the forest is being reclaimed, but it is still risky to walk there, so most people started coming to us. However, our guides do not go that far. There was no need for that before. Stepan used to take people quite far, and now he might agree if he saw any interest, which is doubtful. At 5:00 p.m., the trio settled down on the sofas and began to talk. I watched them. Andrei paid no attention to me. Svetlana gave me contemptuous looks. Victor glanced at me with interest. And I just tried to understand what kind of people they were and whether we would be able to work together. Sighing, I turned to them. Sighed, and before I could say a word, Svetlana said with a fake smile, "We don't need anything." "Thank you." I smiled back sincerely. It seemed to me that you needed a guide. They exchanged glances and stared at me expectantly. Apparently, they thought I was about to call someone. Finally, Andrei realized that I was hinting at myself, smiled, leaned back on the sofa, folded his arms across his chest, and looked through his sunglasses. Did he have a problem with his eyes? Or was it customary in Moscow not to take off your sunglasses day or night? His reaction caused a rush of mental activity among the others. "Because," Victor asked, staring at me. "You're the conductor." "Seriously? What's bothering you?" I asked, adjusting my scarf around my neck as I sat down on the sofa next to Andrei and opposite Victor. "Because you're a girl," Andrei grunted and received a disapproving look from his friend. It's up to you, I shrugged. You know that no one else will take this job, so think for yourselves. Can you really get us there? Victor asked. I can, but I want to know the details. They exchanged glances, and Victor asked, what exactly do you want to know? What are we looking for? What are the deadlines? Are there because Victor asked me, staring at me, are you the conductor? Seriously, what's bothering you? I asked, adjusting my scarf around my neck as I sat down on the sofa next to Andrei and opposite Victor. Because you're a girl, Andrei grunted and received a disapproving look from his friend. It's up to you, I shrugged. You know that no one else will take this job, so think for yourselves. Can you really take us there? Victor asked. I can, but I want to know the details. They exchanged glances, and Victor asked, what exactly do you want to know? What we're looking for? What the deadlines are? Are there any maps? After thinking for a moment, he replied, the deadlines aren't critical, but we'd like to finish within a month. There is a map, but it's not entirely accurate. That is, the location is indicated, but the road is marked on the other side of the forest. We were there. After the hurricane, the area was flooded, and no one dares to go that far, so we decided to try our luck here. I nodded and asked the main question, what are we looking for? Victor glanced at Andrei again, as if seeking his support, but Andrei just shrugged. Then he shook his head and said, we don't know for sure, but it's important to you. Do you understand, Victor? I smiled. People often come here looking for a guide. One grandmother hid her jewels here, another grandfather buried his treasure. It's not a problem to take someone to the place. I would like to understand how legal and safe it is. Maybe there are too many of you for one piece of the pie. Victor replied, in this case, everything is indeed legal. I don't think anyone else knows about this map. And we really don't know if there's anything valuable there. We'll pay you well for your work. I think everyone will be satisfied. I met his gaze. He seemed to be telling the truth. I wonder where they got the map. Can I see the map? I asked Victor. Shrugging his shoulders, he took it out of the bag next to him and handed it to me. I recognized it immediately, even though I had only seen a copy. I don't know what emotions people experience when they are unexpectedly confronted with the past. Mine are extremely unpleasant. I immediately want to send everything to hell, go home, and lie down under the covers. But I had already had my fill, so I stayed and didn't show that I recognized the card. I glanced at it and returned it to Victor. He put the bag away and immediately asked, what do you think? I looked at him thoughtfully, but I was really thinking about my own question, how much will you pay me? Victor named the amount. I whistled mentally. I would have asked for half as much myself. But it's not about the money. Although the amount is certainly nice. Half up front, the other half upon return, I said in the end. Victor glanced at Andrei, who shrugged. They have no choice anyway. I'll take 2 days to prepare, I continued. It's a long trip, so we need to be fully equipped. I'll write a list of things that everyone must have. We're leaving early in the morning on the third day. I'll order a taxi to the hotel. Victor nodded. Svetlana looked at me without taking her eyes off me. It seems that I was no longer a whore in their eyes, but that didn't make me any happier. Now they looked at me warily. I didn't work for the next 2 days. I had time to get ready and arrange my vacation. On the third day, we met at the hotel door. Andrei sat in the front. We sat in the back seat. Victor ended up in the middle. The forest begins almost immediately outside the city, I said on the way. We'll drive to the beginning and walk from there. Walking. According to my calculations, about a week. That's including overnight stays. They just nodded without saying anything. I could see in their eyes that the idea of going into the forest with a girl didn't seem like a good one to them. However, I can't blame them for that. Smiling again, I suggested we switch to using the informal form of address, finally getting at least some kind of response. Before setting off on the long journey, I decided to drop in on Stva. Fortunately, it was only a short detour, and the guys didn't know where we were going. Stva greeted me as if he had been waiting for me. Maybe he really was waiting. Who knows? After looking at my companions, he took me aside and asked, "Are you sure?" I just grunted, "Not." "Did you talk me into this?" Stva sighed. "The guys are shady, the dark one seems normal, but he's just a kid. He's older than me, by the way. And it's not about age." Then he waved his hand. "Okay, what can I say? I don't think you'll find anything." "I think so too." "So you're just going for no reason?" I shrugged. Memories are a funny thing. Sometimes it's better if they weren't there. Without you, I know. I patted him on the shoulder. "Everything will be fine. Everything will be fine." Stva nodded and hugged me. "I have a strange feeling," he said, letting go, "that we won't see each other anymore." "Don't be silly, Stva, I'm starting to worry." He smiled. "Everything will be fine for you. You deserve it." "Well, have a good trip." Leaving the house, I found the three of them sitting on a log with their backpacks between their legs. "Let's sit on the path," I grunted, settling down next to Vaishya. Stva's words instilled confusion in my soul. I was used to trusting his instincts, and even though I didn't expect any trouble from the trip, I began to doubt the correctness of my decision. But there was no turning back. We got up, put on there were no problems as we moved along. Cheerfully. The first night was spent where I had planned. The guys endured the discomfort stoically. Andrei even showed some skill in setting up camp and preparing dinner. Seeing my interested gaze, he said, "I used to take children on camping trips." I couldn't imagine this man doing such a thing, but I didn't comment on it. I glanced at him, but Andrei kept to himself, preferring Svetlana's company. He sat with his hood pulled over his cap and his head buried in the girl's hair. I had never met two people who were less suited to each other. Of course, she could have fallen for him. But what did Andrei see in her? However, he was gentle and caring with her, so I couldn't accuse him of insincerity. And yet it still seemed strange. Svetlana caught my gaze directed at Andrei and began to frown, showing everyone that he was hers. Funny but predictable. Women rarely like me, regardless of whether we have anything in common or not. In the evening, we sat with Vaishya by the fire. The couple had already retired to their room, and I decided I could get some information. Will you tell me where you got the map? I asked Vaishya. He shrugged thoughtfully. I understand that treasure hunters gold, but in this case, everything is legal. The map belonged to my great-grandfather. I don't know if he drew it himself or if it fell into his hands, but in this case, it doesn't matter. How did you get it? By chance. I didn't know about it at all. Svetka found it? She's my cousin. As we found out, all of our great-grandfather's property went to our grandmother, his at that point. My grandfather was already deceased. After the funeral, my grandmother began selling off my great-grandfather's antique items. They weren't very wealthy at the time, so the money they received was helpful. However, all of my great-grandfather's junk, as my grandmother called it, was put into a box. Svetka's father, my uncle, took it, hoping to find something interesting in it. He found this map, but since he wasn't very knowledgeable about such things, he asked for help in understanding its value. In the end, he found out that the map was drawn during the war. My great-grandfather fought in these very places, but what the map reveals is unknown. It could just be the location of troop deployments. My great-grandfather either forgot about the map or didn't want to talk about it. Either way, my uncle put it away in a drawer. Not long ago, Svetka found it and brought it to me. I am a historian by education, so I became interested. So, for me, this is a kind of attempt to learn more about my family. When did your great-grandfather die? I asked, and after hearing the answer, I nodded. 8 years ago, I was just finishing college in Moscow, so the story with the map passed me by. He fell silent. I didn't rush to continue the conversation, mentally putting everything in its place. Apparently, when Vaishya's uncle tried to find out if the map was valuable, he came across the person who took 2038. A copy of it and then sold that copy. The distance between the city of Vit and the place where the map surfaced was about 200 kilometers, but it could be sent by email. The main thing was to have a connection. The map fell into the right hands, and then a new story began. The original turned out to be unclaimed and lay in a closet for many years until it was discovered by the next generation. They were interested and had the time and money, and decided to give it a try. And here we are. I was firmly convinced that we wouldn't find anything, but I didn't want to upset the guy. It seems that they were really motivated by a desire to do good. While I was thinking about this, Vaishya suddenly asked how I became a guide. I glanced at him and sighed. Of course, I'm not a guide in the sense that the word implies. I just lived in the forest and know it well. If I had a choice, I wouldn't have gone to these places, but memory is a strange thing. It pulled me back there again and again until there was not a single trodden path. Stva taught me to see the road ahead and the danger. He wanted to help me and did so as best he could. And I just followed him, giving him the opportunity to pull me out of my personal quagmire. When there's nothing but forest around, what else is there to do? Can you do? I replied with a smile. The fire was dying down and the faces were almost invisible. I felt the guy staring at me, but I doubt he could see anything. You could have left. I didn't see the point. Besides, I don't even have an education. I didn't even finish college. I didn't finish college, just 1 year, although due to circumstances beyond my control, but still. With your looks, you could easily find a job. It's like a compliment. I snorted. Looks alone aren't enough, you know. You have to know how to use them to make money. Although, if you remember the scene they saw. Upon arrival, one might think that I am quite capable of earning money with my looks. Okay, time to sleep. I got up and he followed me. After putting out the fire, I wished him good night and went into the tent. For a while, I listened to him fussing around. Then everything quieted down and I fell asleep. I woke up early, feeling rested. I made breakfast and sat on a log with my coffee, facing the sun. What a rush. Then Andrei and Sveta showed up, and my mood evaporated. I don't like this man. I don't know why, but an inner voice kept whispering that I should be on my guard. I locked onto him. I liked him. I even flirted with him during breakfast, which did not go unnoticed. People's tendency to exaggerate everything they see from a certain point onward has always surprised me. I used to live with huge rose-colored glasses on, so now I have no false illusions. Sometimes a good mood is enough to pour coffee for a pleasant man. While the guys were having breakfast, I asked to see the map. I remembered the way, but it was interesting to look at. The original. On the back, there was a code that allowed you to read the route in a different way and, accordingly, arrive at a different place. I knew how to use the code, so I didn't focus on it, but I asked the company, "Do you know what this code is?" They looked at each other, and Vaishya nodded. "We decoded it," he explained. According to it, the place is slightly shifted from the final point of our journey. And there, we'll have to see how things go. It's possible. Why not? I shrugged. They pay well. I have plenty of time, so it doesn't matter how long I wander around familiar routes. Chapter 2. Another 3 days passed in the same way. We walked, stopping to rest and eat. We didn't talk much. Andrei spent most of his time with Sveta. They would go off alone outside the camp or wander around the forest, even though I warned them that it could be dangerous. We spent time with Vaishya and talked about trivial things, not rushing to reveal our souls to each other, but we were imbued with mutual sympathy. Vaishya was a scientist to the core. He worked at the Moscow Institute, traveled the world on business trips, and also tried to independently research what interested him. He read a lot and devoted all his free time to his passion for history. He was not married and did not have a steady relationship, but he did not mind that. Vaishya was a cheerful, kind guy, not particularly ambitious, but enthusiastic. On the 5th day, we camped near a forest lake. Finally, we had the opportunity to wash properly. While the others were setting up camp, I headed there. I stood there for a while, looking at the water, wondering what would happen next. A couple of days ago, my mood began to change. If at the beginning of the trip I was enjoying life away from civilization, now thoughts of the past were increasingly creeping into my head. I attributed them to our approach to the final destination. The leaves rustled. Looking back, I saw Vaishya coming out onto the clearing and smiled. "I wanted to take a bath," I said to him. He smiled uncertainly, and I almost rolled my eyes. I slowly took off my clothes, threw my scarf over my shoulder, and stepped into the water. It was cool. Standing chest deep, I turned around and shouted cheerfully, "What are you waiting for? Either join me or go back to camp." I swam forward and, when I reached the middle, turned around. Vaishya was swimming towards me. When we met, we swam around a bit and moved towards the shore. Feeling the bottom, I stood in front of the guy. The water in the lake was clear, but I think Vaishya had already seen me on the shore. I'll say without false modesty that there is something to look at there. Unable to resist, Vaishya glanced into the water, but immediately looked up shyly. I could barely hold back a smile and even bit my lip to keep from grinning. It seems the guy can't believe his sudden luck. Of course, he was interested in the scar on my neck. Looking at it, he frowned and asked, "Where did you get that?" I laughed and shook my head. "There's a beautiful naked girl standing in front of you, and you're asking stupid questions. Act before I change my mind." Vaishya smiled too and decided to kiss me. I responded. The kiss became more and more passionate. With one hand, Vaishya pulled my hair, forcing me to tilt my head back. I couldn't see, but I knew he was looking at the scar. A moment later, I felt his lips gently touch my neck, slide down to my collarbone, and return up my neck to my ear. "You're so," he whispered. It was incomprehensible and desirable. I silenced him with a kiss. No words, no feelings. Only physiology. As if understanding my mood, he got down to business. The water was a hindrance, but it also added to the sensations. I turned off my mind and tried to do it so as not to ask myself, why is all this happening? Why do I act this way every time, giving in, letting them take and never be satisfied? For a while after, we stood there, catching our breath. Stepping back, I smiled and headed for the shore. I got dressed and tied a scarf around my neck without looking at the guy. He quickly got dressed and now stood next to me. "Let's go to camp," I smiled, moving in the right direction. Vaishya followed behind me. I walked, enjoying the knitwear around me, not wanting to think or talk. But Vaishya, of course, was not silent. "Where did you get that scar?" "A combat wound," I joked. "An unsuccessful attempt to kill the president. I managed to escape, but the mission was a failure, and they decided to get rid of me." "I managed to escape." "Stop it," he asked impatiently. "I'm asking seriously." "If you're serious," I stopped and turned to him. "I'm not going to tell my life story to a guy I barely know just because we had sex." I turned around and walked on. But Vaishya wasn't satisfied. Did they really want to kill? I rolled my eyes, and so it is every time. They absolutely need to know where the scar came from. I have a couple of tearful stories saved up for such occasions. After hearing them, men start to feel sorry for me and try to give me incomparable pleasure. Sergei, he even got so emotional that he wanted to take me to his Saratov, but he didn't take into account that I didn't need him at all, neither Ratov or Sergei. All these lovers wanted my body and got it. Some wanted my soul and went away empty-handed. But I didn't want anything except to lose myself in another embrace, to prove to myself that I was insignificant and deserved what I had. Vaishya didn't need to know about this. Sighing, I turned back to him. If I please you one more time, will you stop asking stupid questions? These words angered him. What does sex have to do with it? He asked. Interesting question. You'd think you followed me to the lake just like that. It seemed to me that you didn't mind sex, but not heart-to-heart conversations. I walked on. Vaishya caught up with me after a short pause. That guy at the hotel was right, he said angrily. You're just. I wasn't trying to give the impression of a noble girl. Are you even capable of feelings? Does the word love mean anything to you? Leave me alone, I replied calmly. Vaishya exhaled angrily and walked ahead. Strangely enough, I didn't rush. I thought about his words. He apparently decided that after a week of spending time together and having casual sex, I would fall in love with him. Very naive. However, somehow managed to believe that I fell in love at first sight. I remembered how my friends and I came to the city to meet the guide. He was from these parts but had lived all over the world. That's what they told me. I didn't care. At that time, I didn't think much about people, mainly about my own desires. I was leaning against the car, a capricious 20-year-old girl in light pants and a t-shirt. An old foreign car pulled up. A tall guy got out and started greeting everyone. I was staring in the other direction when a shadow fell over me. I turned around, looked up, and he towered over me, handsome, tanned, with bold eyes that took my breath away. His lips curved into a slight smile. He rolled a blade of grass between his teeth. He glanced at me quickly, making everything inside me tremble, and smiled crookedly, shaking my hand. I didn't even notice it. Dmitri said to me. I just nodded, unable to look away. You can call me Mitya. Let's be friends. Yes. And he looked at me as if I had already completely surrendered to him. Yes, I probably looked that way. I had a lot of experience in rejecting men, but with this one, I was confused for the first time. Then I got in the car and tried to get these thoughts out of my head. Nothing could happen between us anyway. That's what I thought then, or tried to convince myself of, while my foolish head was preoccupied with completely different things, leading me to my doom. I didn't notice how I got to the camp. Vaishya was sitting with the guys on the grass. They glanced in my direction but said nothing. Even if Vaishya didn't tell them, I'm sure the couple understood. It wasn't for nothing that Svetlana gave me a contemptuous look. Ha, screw it. Screw everything. According to my calculations, we were supposed to arrive at the place on the appointed day. The closer we got, the more nervous I felt. A voice in my head was already screaming, "Something's wrong." I didn't feel any danger from the guys, but there was nowhere else for it to come from. When we arrived at noon on the 6th, at the location indicated on the map, we were all somewhat tense. The guys wandered around the area for a long time, looking around and talking. I didn't bother them, observing the nature around me. I had my own thoughts. I hadn't voiced them yet, but I was becoming more and more convinced of their correctness. And in this clearing, I received further confirmation. Finally, the guys came to the conclusion that there was no point in staying here and that we should move on. I was getting stronger, and it was hard not to notice my condition. "Something's wrong?" Vaishya asked. I decided it would be wiser to share my thoughts. "It seems to me that there are people nearby." He stared at me in amazement. The area around us was disturbed. Broken branches, trampled grass, fresh tracks on the ground. "I'm sure there are people nearby, but who and how, if no one comes here?" "Who?" "I don't know." "And how?" "On the other side of the forest, they are reclaiming the road." "Who knows, maybe a guide has been found who agrees to guide us. Going from there is much closer but more dangerous. However, there are always daredevils. We were in that city. We were told that there was no one there. They suggested we try our luck in yours. That doesn't mean that no one has found a guide there before." "Are you sure you came from that side?" 100%. No one else would lead us from ours. And the tracks would have been found earlier. They only appeared near the place indicated on the map. After a short pause, Vaishya asked, "Do you think they're looking for the same thing we are?" I shrugged. "You can't say for sure that there are military trophies here, but I wouldn't rule out that possibility." "That's impossible." "No one knew about the map. Svetka brought it to me right away, and I didn't show it to anyone. Andrei helped with the preparations. I worked on the map. Everything. I could say that this is far from there may be people nearby whom I know well, but I am not at all sure that I should meet them." A treacherous thought occurred to me to turn back before it was too late, but it would certainly not be welcomed by my companions. All that remained was to trust in fate and move on. Chapter 3. The next morning, we continued on our way in. Tension. The thought of people weighed heavily on the guys, but for a different reason. They didn't know what to expect from life. If at the beginning of the journey they shied away from the crackling of branches, fearing animals and the forest in general, now the danger had become quite music. I even smiled as I pondered the fact that humanity had become very pitiful creatures. Instead of uniting, we are running away from each other in different directions. In the end, we will be destroyed. My inner voice snorted at this. "Don't worry, you'll probably die sooner." When we were very close to our destination, I turned to the guys. "People are very close, I can hear them." They looked at me suspiciously, listening, but of course they heard nothing. Which is not surprising, since they haven't spent as much time in the forest as I have. "Are you sure?" Vaishya asked. "They're about 700 meters away," I said, "the same distance as our location." Vaishya cursed, apparently hoping until the last moment that it would work out. We don't know who these people are, I continued. That's why we have to be extra careful for the rest of the way. We can sneak up and look at them, trying to remain unnoticed. Then we can think about what to do next. Sveta chimed in with more options. We can go back. No one was happy with that answer. Or you can go to them, get to know them, maybe join forces. You won't get lost here. And you asked Vaishya. I'm going home. I'm not interested in new acquaintances. How are we going to get back? You can't abandon us, we have an agreement. I sighed. Of course, we could ignore the agreement. After all, I only got half the money and I don't have to take any risks. But I knew they would find me anyway. Find me. Better sooner than later. At least I'll know who to expect trouble from. Okay, let's sneak up, take a look around, and then decide what to do, I suggested. The plan was accepted, and we moved forward, trying not to make any noise. At the clearing, I gestured for them to follow me. We went around it to get closer to the bushes that had grown thick on one side. A camp had been set up in the clearing. Excavations were underway a little further away. There were about 10 people in total. So they were taking the matter seriously. Smoke was rising from one of the tents. They were cooking over a fire. I didn't like any of this. It was clear that these people knew where they were going and where to look. To look. They didn't need any competition, even if there was no treasure here. They didn't know that, of course. They wouldn't kill anyone, but there would be no avoiding a conversation. I wasn't sure I needed that. Turning to the guys, I caught Vaishya's thoughtful gaze and signaled for them to move away. Then everything went to hell. Andrei stepped on a rock. It was unstable. The man stumbled and fell into the bushes. There was a commotion in the tent city. People stood up and came out of their tents, looking in our direction. I got ready to run, but Vaishya showed prudence. Let's talk to them. They seem like peaceful guys. 2 brave guys appeared, and I pulled my hood over my head to cover my face. Andrei put his hands out in front of him and said, "Calm down, guys, let's talk." We moved towards the clearing. I walked with my head down, looking back from time to time. We approached the tent when a tall, fat, red-faced man of about 40 came out of it. I stumbled and froze, realizing that my fate was now sealed. One of the guys said, "We found these guys in the bushes, they look like illegal immigrants." The man looked us over. I stood with my head down so that he wouldn't recognize me. "Where did you come from?" he asked in a hoarse voice, panting slightly. Vaishya and Andrei exchanged glances, and the former said reluctantly, "We have a map, we came here following it." "Seriously? Show me." Just as reluctantly, Vaishya pulled out the map. "Wow," the man smiled, looking at it. "It's real. What a coincidence. Who brought you here?" "There are no guides anywhere." "She brought us," Andrei pointed at me, and I tensed up, waiting to see what would happen next. The man approached, took off his hood, and froze, his eyes wide. His mouth opened slightly. He was breathing heavily, not saying a word. Finally, covering his mouth in utter amazement, he whispered, "It can't be." I glanced at him quickly from under my eyebrows and turned away. "Is that you?" he said, still not believing it, and then laughed, still covering his face with his hand. "I can't believe my eyes," he laughed, but not for long. When he finished, he said again, "Is that you?" I sighed heavily. "It's me, Borya, it's me," I said, unable to hold back, and that put everything back in its place. Everyone was looking at me, some with interest, some with surprise. "This is great," Boriko blurted out and began to give orders. "Those three to the side, and I'll talk to the girl separately." With a sweeping gesture, he invited me under the canopy, and I went. What else could I do? "Ask them questions," Borya said to someone as he followed me. It was something like a dining room. Leaning against the table, he looked at me for a while. "Are you going to stare at me for much longer?" I couldn't take it anymore. He grunted. "I can see your dissatisfaction, Milana Sergeyevna, but I can't deny myself. You're weighing up the prospects. And that too. Who would have thought what a successful trip it would be if we still find this three-legged treasure?" I remained silent. Borka continued, "So, what can you tell me?" "I'm not going to tell you anything." "You're being secretive," he grunted, taking out a cigarette and lighting it. "I understand, but it won't help. I'm sure your friends will quickly crack. You just need to put pressure on them. Don't be too eager. First of all, they're not my friends, and secondly, you'd better check who these guys are, or you'll put pressure on them and then you'll have problems." "How clever you've become," Borya smiled again, exhaling smoke and looking at me. "You're still as beautiful as ever, but now your beauty won't save you." "Don't get carried away, Borya," I said peacefully. I said, "I suppose you're still working for Lyokha. He won't pat you on the head if you start misbehaving." Borka grinned maliciously. "Don't scare me, Milana Sergeyevna. I'm not easily frightened. And if you think your beauty will save you, don't count on it. He'll skin you alive in an instant. He doesn't forgive things like that." I smiled. "How well do you know him, Borya?" "We have our own relationship. After all, was there even one woman besides me who managed to tame him?" Borya frowned angrily. I continued, "So we'll see who wins. I'll on his chest about my unfortunate fate. He'll caress me, and then everything will work out on its own," said Borya completely without malice. To be honest, I was bluffing. It was clear that they wouldn't let me go, which meant I'd end up with Lyokha. Exactly. Our relationship is not easy. He won't forgive me for what I did. Borya is right about that. "So you won't say anything?" he asked. I shrugged. "Well, okay, I'll find out anyway. Your friends won't keep quiet. What should we do with you, or you'll run away again? I can't survive such a loss a second time." It was hard then, wasn't it? I couldn't hold back. "It's better not to remember. It's lucky for you that he didn't find you." We had a hard time. We lost 2 guys while getting out of the forest. They took us far to the west, and in the end we ran into some group that led us out. Okay, let's go talk to your companions, since you say you'll only talk in the presence of a lawyer. We came out onto a clearing. I sat down on the grass. Borka stamped his feet, called the boy over, and told him not to take his eyes off me. I plucked a blade of grass and began chewing it, staring ahead. Borka sat a little to the side by the way. Peacefully. It even seemed to me that they had found a common language. The boy assigned to me watched me for a while, then couldn't resist and said, "I know who you are." Glancing at him, I stared ahead again and remarked, "I'm very glad." He apparently thought I didn't understand, because he continued, "8 years ago, you ran away with Vaishya's. I'm looking for him. Good luck." My taciturnity discouraged the guy. After a pause, he made another attempt. "Do you know where he is?" "I have no idea," I replied again briefly. "Why don't you want to help?" "Why should I help you? I'll arrange your escape if you share the information." "How did you even get on the team with that attitude?" I asked. "I had to try hard. They hope to find the treasure, and I hope to find traces of Vaishya's. I've been looking for him for 8 years. Where does such zeal come from?" He didn't have time to answer because Borka turned to me again. He told the boy to bring the things left on the road. The boy left, casting a meaningful glance at Milana Sergeevna. "Can I call you that, or do you prefer the name Ludmila now?" I just looked at him and turned away. My glances had no effect on Bor. He was in a great mood. "We'll be done here in a couple of days," he continued. "I don't know if we'll find anything. As far as I'm concerned, the map is useless." "Well, so what, when we found such a treasure," he hinted at me. "I'm not forcing you to work. You can rest, but stay within the clearing." Borya called over another guy. "Watch her, Voba. If you lose the girl, I'll cut your head off. She's cunning and cheeky, so don't fall for her provocations." "Sorry, Milana Sergeevna," he addressed me again. "The measures are a bit harsh, but I really don't want to lose you." I just turned away again. After Bork left, my trio approached and sat down next to me. "What did you agree on?" I asked Ved. He shrugged. "They don't mind us participating in the excavations, but they're not sure they'll find anything at all." "I had to tell them about you," he said guiltily. I smiled. "What a nice guy. Where do they find them? Do you know that fat guy? Why does he call you Milana?" I smiled at the guy and stared ahead. "Do you still want to know what you don't?" Vaishya whispered something to Sviti, and they and Andrei moved aside. Vaishya looked at me. "You were hiding from these people. They tried to kill you, so you changed your name. You have a vivid imagination." I smiled. "It's much simpler than that. My advice to you is to forget about this story, find your treasure, and then go home and enjoy life." Vaishya snorted angrily. "I want to help you, but all you do is be stubborn. If you meet me halfway, maybe things will get better." I looked at him, shaking my head. How little he knows about what's going on, but such of course difficult to assess. He didn't try to kill me, I said. And no one has ever tried to kill me. You made that up yourself. I didn't say anything like that. The scar is the result of an accident. Borka didn't do anything bad to me. When I was living under a different name. I won't argue. And we were acquainted. But then I wanted to change everything, and I approached this desire with gusto. So you're going with him? Most likely, I shrugged. And you can leave if you want. I smiled. Of course, I just need to strangle this guy at night. I nodded. My escort? He was standing nearby and heard our conversation. He grunted at my words. So you're not free after all, Vaishya stated. I didn't answer. I sat and watched what was happening. The boy returned with our backpacks. They began to prepare our tent sites. Borka walked around and gave loud instructions. If there was communication here, they would probably have already called and told us about their find. I sat without moving. There was no point in running. Where to? In the city they would find me quickly. I couldn't lie down. I didn't have any other documents. And it wasn't certain that I would even be able to run away from this clearing, even if I tried. I resigned myself to the inevitability of the future, sunbathed, picked flowers, and simply dozed in the shade. No one bothered me, although I constantly caught people looking at me. Someone knew me, someone had heard about me. Rumors spread through the tent city instantly. Vaishya listened to them, frowned, but didn't join in the conversations. And thank God, he and Andrei helped with the excavations. Sveta mostly hung around doing nothing. When it became clear that there was no treasure, they started to pack up to go back. The guide, a thin, tall man in his 40s, knew his business. He led us along a road that had been reclaimed after the hurricane. It was harder but shorter. Everything has its pros and cons. The man looked at me with interest, I suppose professionally, but did not approach me. Either he was afraid, or Borko forbade him, who knows. 4 days later, we found ourselves in the city where our paths with my trio were to part. Ignoring Borko's glances, I went to say goodbye. However, Andrei and Svetlana just nodded to me, but Vaishya looked at me sadly. You're a good person, I said to him. He shook his head. I'll help you, he replied. That's hardly an honest word. I hugged him and patted him on the back. You rarely meet a guy like that. I kissed him on the cheek and returned to the car. Borka grunted. Your tastes have changed. A blonde would suit you better. His girlfriend was against it. Borka laughed, and we drove off. He called Lyokha. I understood that from the conversation. They didn't find anything. Not at all sad, Borka replied to the question. But we found something else. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. You'll see when we get there. We're on our way. Borya hung up and stared at me through the rearview mirror. Well, Milana Sergeyevna, get ready for meeting. Why are you calling me by my full name? I smiled. And he replied, I've been doing it since time immemorial. I remembered our first meeting. Borka drove up to Lyoka's place, and I was walking down the hallway wearing a men's t-shirt over my bare body. Lyoka suddenly said, "Baby, meet Boris, my assistant in many of my affairs." Boris, trying to look anywhere but at my legs, held out his hand. I offered mine in response. "Boris," he nodded. I said importantly, "Milana Sergeevna." Boris gave Lyoka a puzzled look. Lyoka smiled and replied, spreading his arms, "What can I say, Milana Sergeevna?" So, Milana Sergeevna, it stuck. He called me you but addressed me by my patronymic. Apparently, he really got used to it. As we know, bad habits are hard to break. "Times are changing," I said. "It's time to get rid of patronymics. I'm so used to it. You know, I'm conservative. Why didn't you tell Lyoka that you found me?" "Are you kidding?" He even laughed. "I wouldn't miss the moment when the devil sees you for anything in the world. I hope someone sings to him first." "Let them try." Borka shook his fist in the air. "Considering that one of his people is a defector from the enemy tribe, then the threat is very conditional. By the way, the defector himself was sitting next to me, and I could feel his tension. Will he try to continue his conversations? Now it will be more difficult. And I have nothing to say to him, so it's pointless anyway." The journey was long, and I spent most of it dozing. When I wasn't sleeping, I sat with my eyes closed. I had no desire to talk. Gradually, excitement crept up on me. I didn't know what awaited me in my hometown. Of course, it was unlikely that Lyoka hated me so much so that. To mock, he's not that kind of person most likely, he just doesn't care too much. Time has passed to remember one of his women. I pushed the thoughts away, deciding to rely on fate, but they kept coming back, and with them, anxiety. By the time we arrived at Lyoka's house, I had worked myself up so many times that I had calmed down. I had no strength left to worry. "Wait for me in the car," Borka said to the guys. And to me he said, "Put on your hood for effect." I ignored his words. "You have the same bad temper," Borka grumbled as he got out of the car and breathing heavily. I felt movement. Turning around, I saw a boy persistently asking about the night. Slip a note into my shorts pocket. I just raised my eyebrows in surprise but didn't say anything. Borka and I headed for the entrance door. The guys stayed on the street, stretching their legs. "Is that a reminder?" Borya asked sarcastically, letting me go ahead. Once again, I remained silent. We took the elevator up and walked to the apartment. Borya pulled the handle and opened the door. It was unlocked. He walked ahead. I heard Lyoka's voice. "What are you hiding?" "What happened?" Borya stepped aside, and I, feeling my heart pounding, entered the hall. Lyoka stood there, frowning and with his hands in the pockets of his sweatpants. When he saw me, he froze. I don't know what effect Borya was expecting, but not a single muscle in his face twitched. True, he stood there motionless, staring at me. Borya seemed afraid to breathe as he watched him. I glanced at Lyoka but immediately looked away, examining the hall. I didn't notice any changes. Then Lyokha said, "Borya, please leave us alone. I'll get in touch with you." Borya, who hadn't expected this turn of events, quietly slipped away, closing the door behind him. Lyokha approached, looking at my face. I didn't know what to say, and I was afraid to look at him. When I looked up, he slapped me across the cheek. Turning around, he headed for the living room, saying as he went, "Follow me." I rubbed my cheek and looked in the mirror. It had turned bright red and burning. I deserved the slap, so I silently walked through the living room to the kitchen, which was separated by an archway. Lyokha was standing by the window, smoking, and looking out at the street. I sat down at the table. When he finished smoking, he stubbed out his cigarette in the ashtray on the windowsill and rubbed his face. I briefly examined him. Over the years, he had hardly changed. Tall, well-built, clean-shaven temples, an earring in his ear, brown eyes looking seriously, plump lips tightly pressed together. Many of Lyokha's acquaintances claimed that he never laughed or even smiled. In part, this was true. He laughed very rarely. I personally witnessed this only a few times. At such moments, dimples appeared on his cheeks and he looked like a mischievous boy. Lyokha seemed to consider smiling a luxury. A luxury, so people could observe its pitiful semblance in those moments when he quickly grinned and the corners of his lips stretched for a moment. Lyokha was always serious. Now he sat opposite me, glancing at me and remaining silent, so nothing interfered with the memories that came to mind. Chapter 4. I must say my whole life seemed like one big misunderstanding. My mother, a God-fearing woman preparing for life after death in the kingdom of heaven, was responsible for my upbringing. She didn't know if my father would make it there, but she decided to take me with her. That's why, from an early age, I was raised with extreme strictness. I did not go to kindergarten, and when it was time to go to school, I was sent to a church-affiliated boarding school for girls. Those years of schooling were some of the most difficult of my life. I did not understand or accept what was being instilled in us, and thoughts completely opposite to those were swirling around in my head. They concerned both this life and the next, which I didn't think was so terrible. During puberty, new thoughts were added to these, which tormented not only my mind but also my body. As soon as I brought this up, they tightened the rules. That's when it became clear, it was better to keep quiet and pretend that everything suited me, and to keep my thoughts and desires to myself. I turned out to be an excellent pretender. No one could have suspected how far I was from church truths and what I lived for in my dreams. After school, I returned to our city and enrolled in the philology department at my mother's behest. She would have gladly sent me to seminary, but she didn't think it was possible to let me leave Moscow, so she chose the safest faculty in her opinion. After class, I had to go home immediately. My mother's discipline was not then at the boarding school, but of course I wanted something else. I blossomed, transforming from a teenager into a beautiful girl with a sexy figure. At least that's how it seemed to me when I secretly looked through magazines in the library. I had no friends at the institute and was called a nun because I dressed and behaved accordingly. My whole life was focused on books. In them, I sought solace, immersing myself in love stories. Life went on day after day, and each passing day was a copy of the everything worked out for me. By chance, that year my mother enrolled me in the local drum choir, so my life was filled with hours of tedious rehearsals. It became increasingly difficult to pretend that I was interested. My personality was bursting out, and I had to exert a lot of effort to restrain myself. Spending most of her time in prayer, my mother demanded the same of me, not noticing how far I was from such a way of life. Perhaps if she had tried to present her idea in a more accessible way, everything would have worked out. But as it was, I only felt protest and irritation towards my family and life. Toward God. My relationship with my father was friendly but not close, which was also contributed to by my mother. For a long time, I wondered how they managed to get together. My father had a gentle and calm personality. At one point, his wife left him. He went to church, where he met my mother. What something in heaven locked them together because my mother, who was 38 at the time, clung to the man. A year later, I appeared. Although I vaguely imagine my mother making love to my father, I vaguely imagined the whole process in principle. I still remember the day we met Lyokha in detail because it became a turning point in my whole life. Lyokha the devil got his nickname because he was rumored to be immortal. It all started in childhood. At the age of 7, the boy Lesha was riding a bicycle and was hit by a truck. There was a dent in the bumper, the bicycle was in pieces, but he was without a single scratch. That's when someone first said that Lyokha was born under a lucky star. After that incident, the boy's mind shut down, and he began to lead a reckless lifestyle. By the age of 20, Lyokha had tried all kinds of extreme sports without suffering a single serious injury and earning several KMs. He was not very interested in sports, although he was predicted to have a bright future. Lyokha abandoned all reason. He was simply testing the theory that he was born under a lucky star. The more it was confirmed, the more he risked. After graduating from school, Lyokha entered the institute to study physics. After 2 years, he joined the army, deciding that there was no better way to test his luck. He spent 4 years in a hot spot and returned without a single injury. He decided to go into business. Some gangster-looking guys came to him, and Lyokha, sensing excitement, threw himself headlong into this new activity, went downhill, and became very enthusiastic. He woke up 4 years later, realizing that there was no one left to fight. He had achieved everything he wanted, and he was only 26 years old. It was during those harsh times that he got his nickname. Lyokha was called Lucky. His business was going smoothly. Dissatisfied people broke away without causing any harm, and numerous attempts to eliminate him were unsuccessful. People joked that Lyokha had made a deal with the devil, then someone joked that he himself was like the devil, and the nickname suddenly stuck. When Lyokha the devil and I met, I was 19 and he was 27. It would seem that people like us would never cross paths, but fate likes to laugh at people, bringing them together in completely inappropriate situations. It was summer. A couple of days ago, I finished my third year of college and was now actively drumming in the choir, preparing for the grand parade in honor of the city's day. I was returning from rehearsal, dragging my drum behind me and thinking about how I would walk in the front row wearing an ugly skirt and blouse while the other girls would be sparkling in beautiful outfits. My mother told me not to stare at people on the street, but I did it anyway because most of them seemed like representatives of another planet to me, and I was busy making up stories about them. Stories while waiting for the green light. I stared at a real freak nearby with a funny hairstyle, dressed in bright clothes. When the traffic started moving, I stepped onto the crosswalk, shifting my attention to the road. Near the crosswalk on the other side, there was a beautiful car. Its owner, a guy in his 20s, was smoking, leaning against the for a moment. Our eyes met, and I felt a sudden jolt inside. You could call it a premonition. I wasn't interested in men and didn't consider them attractive, but then a strange inner feeling made me stop and turn around when he. Naturally, on any other day, I would have walked on, pretending not to hear him or giving him a short and concise rebuff. But I stopped, and now it seemed indecent to leave. The guy came up, glanced at me, raised his left eyebrow, and asked, "Are you a musician?" I was tormented by the very fact that we were standing together and didn't know what to say. Silently, I nodded. "Do you play the drums?" he continued. I nodded, which amused him. He raised his left eyebrow again, and for some reason I couldn't take my eyes off him. "Are you preparing for a concert?" I almost nodded again, but realizing how silly it looked, I forced myself to say, "We're going to perform with the orchestra at the city festival." And again, his left eyebrow crept upward. "Will you be performing in the square?" I nodded. "I'll come and watch." Not knowing what to say, I smiled awkwardly. "What's your name?" He continued to stare at me. "Milana." "I'm Alexei." "You have a beautiful name, a rare one." "Who came up with it?" "My father." "Actually, my mother christened me Milania because there was no Milan there was no gift in Milan's name, but according to the documents, I was Milan and preferred to be called that." "What are you going to do after the parade?" he asked. And I was taken aback, not expecting such a question. We were talking about names, weren't we? Anyway, after the parade, I was going to either go home or find Pia with the orchestra. My mother reluctantly agreed to this. I didn't care about either option, and there was no point in mentioning them. So I shrugged my shoulders uncertainly. "If you want, we can go for a walk," he suggested, switching to the informal form of address. And I made a face as if the guy had said something completely ridiculous. He reacted to this with another raise of his eyebrows, attributing my reaction to himself, although it was more related to a similar event in my life. Trying to smooth things over, I smiled and shrugged. "Anything is possible," I said to him. "I'm sorry, I have to go." I left him standing on the road in bewilderment. Lyokha didn't know anything about me, so he attributed my behavior to female arrogance. Although I looked modest, he couldn't believe that I was so bad at communicating with men. He was sure that I was just pretending to be a good girl. If you look at the root of the matter, that's how it was. I smiled all the way home. It was so easy. I wanted to fly away with the drum. I thought I would be able to get this episode out of my head, but Nadia did nothing but remember it. I even decided that I could pull it off so that after the parade I could meet this guy. At the parade, I looked worse than everyone else. I was wearing a wide skirt below the knee and a loose white blouse with a high neck. These clothes hid my figure. The other girls were wearing short skirts, and against their background I looked even more ridiculous. There was a large crowd. I looked for Lyokha but didn't see him. However, it's not surprising. I felt hurt. By the way, I decided on a desperate act and arranged everything. Mom is at work, Dad will pick up the drum, and I'll pretend to go to tea, when in fact I'll sneak away to meet him. But it seems that no one is. After the performance, I went to the bus, trying to spot Lyokha, but he was nowhere to be seen. When I had already given up hope, I saw him by the car in the parking lot. My heart skipped a beat and a smile spread across my face. Everything had come and was waiting. Quickly saying goodbye to the girls, I hurried in the right direction, looking around, afraid of being caught. I approached Lyasha and said, "Let's go." He didn't ask any unnecessary questions and opened the car door. That's how my first relationship began. It was strange and ambiguous. At first, it was platonic, which was enough for me. My adrenaline was already off the charts. Maybe Lesha perceived our meetings as dates. I was sitting on a volcano. If we went for a walk, it was in the back alleys of parks. If we sat in a cafe, it was in places where my friends couldn't see us. Lesha, realizing that there was no point in calling me anywhere, he gave me the right to choose the meeting place. I was a complete mystery to him. He thought I was shy around him. It never even occurred to him what tricks I was using to carve out a free evening for myself and escape from home under a plausible pretext. Under good circumstances, we saw each other twice a week. By the end of the first month, I finally relaxed and began to open up. Here was a man in front of whom I didn't have to pretend to be a God-fearing lamb. I quickly grew bolder. I don't know where it came from, but I teased him, was sarcastic, and acted like a bitch. I liked it. He didn't mind either. A month later, we had our first kiss. For Lyokha, it was probably an unrealistic time frame, but to me it seemed like everything was developing very quickly. That day, he got out of the car, opened my door, and offered me his hand. As soon as I was outside, he pressed me against the car with his body, wrapping his arms around my waist. At first, I was scared, even though I understood what was about to happen. I had no idea what to do. Lyokha leaned down and gently wrapped his lips around mine. He pulled me closer. It felt nice. A shiver ran through my body, and I closed my eyes and leaned in, wrapping my lips around his in response and holding him by the shoulders. At first, we kissed slowly, as if teasing each other. My head began to spin. The air in my chest seemed to run out, and my lower abdomen ached pleasantly. I bit his lip, and Lyokha lost control. He pressed me harder against the car and slid his hand over my body. I stood still, burying my hands in his hair. Lyokha added his tongue to the kiss, and at the same squeezed my breast. It was impossible to bear. My head was spinning, my lower abdomen was aching so badly that I began to press myself against Lyokha, feeling his arousal. I realized that if little and it would happen right there in the car. So, with great effort, I pulled away. Lyokha looked at me with a cloudy gaze, breathing heavily. I wasn't any better myself, but I smiled anyway and said, "Quiet, boy, or you'll explode." Smiling, he walked away, took out a cigarette, and lit it, keeping his eyes on me. Shaking his head, he said, "Why am I putting up with all this? Okay, where were we going?" Kissing became part of our program, and I knew I wouldn't last long. With each meeting, the desire grew stronger and it became harder and harder to hold back. Nevertheless, I held out for almost another month before deciding, it's time. Since my life was steeped in French classical novels, I believed that this event should be extraordinary. My mind was in turmoil. Being detached from real life, I saw everything around me in a different light than those who were raised in a normal environment. Therefore, novels were not works of art for me, but instructions for action. I adorned my life with books. Realities, I was sure that it was like that and operated according to the same laws. Taking a large sum of money out of my stash, I spent it on a little black dress, underwear, stockings, and high-heeled shoes. In one of the magazines, this outfit was recognized as the most flattering. I had to spend some time learning how to walk in high heels. It turned out to be difficult. That evening, I told my mother that I was going to a friend's house to study. She let me go. I had hidden my bag with my things in a storage locker in advance. I picked up my bag and went to the cafe where we agreed to meet with Lyokha. I changed clothes and put on makeup in the bathroom. He was standing opposite the entrance, and I heard Lyokha arrive. Taking a deep breath, I wished myself luck and went out into the hall. Lyokha was sitting at a table. He glanced in my direction but didn't recognize me right away, but almost immediately his left eyebrow crept upward and his mouth opened slightly. I tried to act confident, thinking about not stumbling. I was lucky. I froze over Lyokha. He looked me up and down and asked, "What's this about?" Leaning close to his ear, I whispered, "Guess." Our eyes met. He simply couldn't believe the obvious answer, only twitching his eyebrow. "Are you serious?" he finally asked. "I'm about to change my mind. Let's go." He got up, took my hand, and led me to the exit. "Where are we going?" he asked as soon as we got in the car. His gaze wandered over my body, and I felt a heat spreading through my lower abdomen. "You decide," I replied with a shrug. My voice was hoarse, and Lyokha flared his nostrils as he started the engine. We arrived at his house and didn't waste any time. Already at the doorstep, Lyokha wrapped his arms around me and started kissing me. His hands shamelessly slid over my body. I lost my head. Too many emotions. Suddenly, impulses flashed through my body. It felt like I was melting under Lyokha's hands. Deftly unzipping my dress, he pulled it off me. I kicked off my shoes. Lyokha's gaze was no less arousing than his touch. Stepping back to look at me standing in front of him in my underwear and stockings, he pulled off his t-shirt revealing his beautiful, strong, toned physique. He returned to me, and I, emboldened, ran my trembling fingers down his torso from his chest to his navel and paused for a moment along the dark strip of hair leading down to his jeans. Lyokha even clenched his teeth, breathing heavily, but not moving. I started to unbuckle his belt, looking him in the eyes. He didn't take his eyes off me. Then I started on his jeans and pulled them down. It was incredibly vulgar and sexy. I was already shaking quite a bit. My lower abdomen was cramping. Thoughts scattered in my head, the whole world disappeared, and only the two of us remained, and that was more than enough. Lyokha's patience was running out. Stepping over his jeans, he quickly picked me up under my thighs, lifted me, and carried me to the bedroom, kissing me wherever he could along the way: my neck, my chest, my collarbone. He threw me onto the bed, positioned himself between my legs, and began kissing me aggressively, invading my mouth with his tongue. My mouth. I knew I had to confess to him. With difficulty, I pulled away and said, looking into his eyes, "I've never been with anyone before." Lyokha froze, raising his eyebrow as usual. "Are you serious?" he asked incredulously. I nodded. He looked at my body again, as if examining it from a new angle. "Relax," he whispered, kissing me. "Are you ready? Everything will be fine." It wasn't fine, but it was tolerable, strange, unusual. And then I stood in the shower, washing away the smell of someone else's body, not believing that it had happened. When I appeared in the kitchen wearing only a towel, Lyokha was smoking by the window. "What do you want to do?" he asked, looking at me with interest. Slowly. I said, "I'd like to do it again." He raised an eyebrow, looking at me. I won't say that I really wanted to, but we didn't see each other often enough to waste time. Stubbing out his cigarette, Lyokha pulled me by the hand and, turning me sharply with his back to him, bent me over the table. He slipped his hand under the towel and ran it along my thigh, leaning forward and pressing me against him, and I felt aroused again. "You're amazing," Lyokha whispered and gently bit my earlobe. I exhaled and leaned toward him, but he continued, "You need a couple of days to rest." And stepping back, he straightened up. I followed. "Why?" I asked him. He shrugged. "Physiology. It could be harmful." "Well, then I'm going home." I went to get my clothes. "Just like that? Maybe you'll stay the night." Imagining my mother's reaction, I almost laughed. Lyokha didn't like this mockery. I added, so as not to upset him, "I'm sorry, I can't." He walked me to the door. We carried away by the kiss. "When will we see each other again?" asked Lyokha. I am still surprised that such an authoritative man as he willingly indulged my weaknesses and gave in to my desire. "I don't know," I whispered to him. "We'll talk about it later. I'll let you know the conspiracy was at its peak." I bought a second SIM card, but only turned it on to text Lyokha about the meeting. "I want you to stay," he whispered, seeing my protesting gaze, and began to kiss me. I got carried away and didn't notice how I ended up sitting on the dresser. Lyokha positioned himself between my legs, holding my hair with one hand, forcing me to obey, kissing me strongly, even roughly, biting me, but that only inflamed me. Then his hand slid down my legs under my dress, and I whispered, "You said yourself you couldn't." Taking a deep breath, Lyokha buried his nose in my shoulder and stood there for a moment. It was nice to hug him. I stroked his strong shoulders and back, burying my hands in his hair. He gently ran his fingers along my spine, and all of this aroused me no less than passionate kisses. Finally, Lyokha reluctantly pulled away. "I have to go," I said, climbing down from the dresser. He nodded and opened the door. Chapter 5. I ran home that evening. I washed off my makeup at Lyokha's place and changed my clothes in the restroom at a gas station while waiting for a taxi. Usually, I got around on my own, choosing side streets. Our town is small, and there's always a chance of being found out. But this time, there was no time, so I had to take a risk. I was lucky. My mother spent the whole evening visiting friends, but I couldn't relax. Too much was at stake now. We started seeing each other more often. I twisted and turned, coming up with excuses for my absences. It was difficult, but passion pulled me out of the house. Lyokha and I turned out to be perfect partners. Very quickly, sex became not just great, but beyond praise. That's why it was getting harder and harder to leave him. "Why don't you want to stay?" he asked every time. I made excuses, not wanting to tell the truth. I wanted our relationship to remain a game, a daring exchange ending in fire and passion. At least, that's how I perceived everything that was happening. I joked around, trying to provoke him. It turned me on when he got angry. And him too, to be honest. But then he asked, "Who do you think I am?" I laughed and shook my head. "What a silly question," I replied. We collided for a moment like two fragments in space. There is an incredible flame between us, and we enjoy it. Inevitably, at some moment we will fly apart again. So what's the point of all this talk? Here it is. The grandiloquence of the syllable derived from Stendhal, Balzac, and Maupassant. And I, by the way, spoke from the heart, not trying to raise my price. But that time, of course, I went too far. Lyokha remained silent, and I decided that the question was closed. However, it turned out to be much more complicated, and soon I was convinced of this. Another 2 months passed. I went to school and then met with Lyokha. I came up with all sorts of reasons for my absences. I even decided to join some kind of institute committee so that excuse my absence. But that turned out to be unnecessary. Fate tripped me up when I least expected it, and everything went to hell. That day, my mother was going to meet an old friend at the train station, take her home, and visit her. Delighted that I had a free evening, I went to meet Lyokha, arranging to meet her far from my place of residence. We met and went to the car. It was parked in the yard, and there we ran into my mother and her friend. The scene was worse than in the Inspector General. Everyone froze. While I was thinking of what to say, my mother came to her senses. Milana asked who this man was. Apparently, she began to figure out what was going on. Before I could open my mouth, Lyokha said, "Milana and I are dating. She is a beautiful woman and a delightful lover." I was so stunned that I forgot about my mother and the situation and just stared at him with my mouth open. He didn't change his expression, as if what was happening was nothing out of the ordinary, and he's not ruining my life right now. My mother and her friend were also stunned and opened their mouths. However, the former quickly recovered, blushed, and spoke up. "How dare you?" She caught my "Milana, is it true?" For the first time in my life, I didn't know what to say, afraid that any word would make the situation worse. However, there was no need to say anything. Mom realized that this was no joke and began to gasp for air, searching for words. "You will come with me immediately." She grabbed me by the elbow, and Lyokha gently held the other. I stared at the man. The bastard politely remarked, "Why are you reacting like this? After all, we've been dating for more than a month." I tried to understand why he was treating me this way. Meanwhile, my mother couldn't take it anymore and, apparently forgetting that she was Orthodox, a Christian, slapped me across the face and added a few swear words. Unlike her, I remembered the Orthodox principles, so I humbly turned the other cheek. This only seemed to aggravate the situation. My mother pulled me out of Lyokha's arms, who did not resist much and even pushed me towards her. Soon I was locked up at home. The Christian woman slapped me across the face and added a few swear words. Unlike her, I remembered the Orthodox principles, so I humbly turned the other cheek. This only seemed to aggravate the situation. My mother pulled me out of Lyokha's hands, who did not resist much and even pushed me in her direction. Soon I was locked in my room at home, lying on the bed, angry mostly at Lyokha. After all, he saw what was happening, and instead of playing along, he ruined everything. And he did it on purpose. I tried to understand the reason, because everything had been so good. In the end, I came to the conclusion that he was bored and simply took advantage of the situation. What a bastard! I hissed, pacing around the room. By nightfall, it had only gotten worse. My mother announced that she saw no other option but to send me to my aunt near Smolensk. I was horrified. My aunt was even more devout than my mother. She lived and worked at a convent. Apparently, my mother had decided that worldly life was not for me and that I could only find salvation hiding behind the monastery walls. I didn't protest, on the contrary, I humbly accepted the decision, secretly hoping that my mother would change her mind and soften the punishment. However, 10 days passed and things didn't get any better. Everything had been arranged with my aunt. Bus tickets had been bought, and I, sitting under house arrest, had to pack my things to leave my confinement in 2 days. Fortunately, well, that's what my mother said, no one found out about my disgrace, so there was a chance not to tarnish the honor of our family. The main thing was to get rid of me as soon as possible. Strangely enough, my father took my side, trying to prove to my mother that anyone can slip up and that I should be saved not with oppression but with love, as written in a famous book. But she forgot about all the books because there was no way to change her mind. It became clear that my life was over. All my dreams and goals would unfulfilled. It would be fine if I didn't know how to live any other way, but no, I would have to die behind high walls and remember moments of happiness. There was no way to contact Lyokha. My phone had been confiscated. And then I realized that I couldn't accept such injustice. My whole nature rebelled, and a voice inside me began to grew louder, saying that no one has the right to control another person's life, that I am an adult and my own mistress, that I can survive and don't care what anyone thinks of me. Yes, if my own mother is ready to bury her daughter in a monastery against her will, what does she even? I had reached the most terrible thoughts, and when I jumped out of bed, the clock showed midnight. Trying not to make any noise, I began to tie the ends of the sheets I had taken from the closet. Fortunately, we lived on the third floor, and there was a spreading cherry tree below, and I was so determined that I was ready to jump out of the window right onto the mop, like Margarita in the famous book. Truly, something inside me snapped that night, and I became the most natural, fearless witch. I had no passport or money, and there was nothing else to take with me. Once dressed, I crawled down the sheets and soon was striding briskly through the nighttime city. There was nowhere to go. My relatives said, I don't have any close friends. So I went to Lyokha. The concierge knew me and let me in right away. Lyokha met me in the hall in his underwear and a t-shirt. He had been told I was coming. The door to the apartment was open, although he often left it open. All because of the same stupid habit of playing with death, playing catch-up. A dim light was burning in the hallway. I froze, looking at the man with anger. He just smiled. Shaking my head, I went into the kitchen and poured some wine, taking the bottle from the cupboard. Lyokha froze, leaning against the wall and looking at me with interest. He forgot what I looked like. I couldn't help myself, putting down the glass. I missed you. Really? Didn't you betray me? Now I'm homeless. I had to run away from home because my mother is going to send me to a convent, he finished. I stared at him suspiciously. How do you know, baby? He shook his head as he walked past and sat down at the table. You're not stupid. You can see I'm not a guy from your department. Do you think I didn't know anything about you? Who you are, who your parents are, what you do, where you study, all your secrecy with meetings and passwords. Why the hell were you pretending not to know? I got angry. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought you were just having fun. And they tell you that you're a model girl, a gentle, virginal soul who has devoted her life to God. But every time I looked at you, I saw a sexy, unprincipled bitch. Well, when I realized that you really are that and everything else is just pretense, it became interesting. So I played spy, waiting for you to get tired of it and tell me the truth, or everything would work itself out. And as you can see, he raised his eyebrow. Everything worked itself out. Of course, I got even angrier. You betrayed me by telling my mother that I was your lover. If you knew What would happen? Why the hell did you do it? I walked up to him and leaned over his face, resting my hands on the back of his chair.